The Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Republic, the servants of the light and protectors of the weak. They were close allies of the Republic for 25,000 years, but as we described in a recent video, the nature of that alliance and the structure of the Jedi Order itself changed over time. In this video, we'll be discussing the Jedi's role in the period that caused these dramatic transformations, the Sith Wars, which tore the galaxy apart and forced the Jedi Order to adapt, evolve, and ultimately become much more closely joined with the Republic.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Jedi were not warriors, and for most of the Republic's history, they weren't really involved in its wars. Occasionally, they fought as allies alongside the Republic military, and on one occasion, they fought against the Republic, but typically, the Order considered the Republic's wars to be the Republic's business, and the Jedi spent these periods of conflict helping the innocents that would inevitably be caught in the crossfire. Only when there was a truly grave threat that the Council believed threatened galactic civilization would the Jedi Order go to war. But in the later millennia of Republic history, such threats became increasingly common. The Sith were the reason for this. Following the Jedi Order's second Great Schism, the 100-Year Darkness, which began in 7000 BBY, the exiled Dark Jedi conquered the Sith of Korriban and Ziost, declaring themselves the first Lords of the Sith. They fused Dark Jedi techniques and those of the native Sith to form the Sith Order, and for 2,000 years they ruled over a brutal empire in the remote reaches of the Outer Rim, where they plotted revenge against the Jedi and the Republic. In 5000 BBY, after a pair of Republic hyperspace scouts stumbled upon Korriban and unintentionally offered the Sith a route into the heart of Republic space, the Sith took their chance, and the first of many Sith Wars began. Previously, the Wars of the Jedi and the Wars of the Republic had mostly been separate affairs. The Republic's wars were political or territorial in nature, while the Jedi Orders were usually battles with sects of Dark Jedi, which the Order could handle on its own. But the Great Hyperspace War of 5000 BBY was a fusion of the two, as the Sith Empire was both a threat to the Republic and a league of Darksiders, more powerful than the threats faced by the Republic and the Jedi before. The Jedi Knights thus fought side by side with the Republic military against the invaders, thwarting the Sith attack on Coruscant and the Core Worlds. Over the course of the next few years, the Jedi then led Republic military forces in an assault on Sith space, destroying the Sith Empire and apparently destroying the Sith teachings as well. In the Great Hyperspace War, the Jedi Order fought in defense of the Republic, and in the process, it was fighting against the armies of the dark side. Later wars with the Sith, who obviously survived their defeat in the Great Hyperspace War, would follow in a similar pattern. Over the course of the next few thousand years, these conflicts would lead to a steady shift in how the Jedi thought about the Republic. Over time, they would start to believe that fighting in defense of the Republic was fighting against the dark side, even when their enemies weren't Sith. This shift wasn't immediate, of course. Once the Great Hyperspace War was over, the relationship between the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic largely went back to the way it was before. The Jedi did assist the Republic in many smaller conflicts during the post-Mandaron period, but these were all defensive, and the Jedi continued to treat the Republic as an ally rather than a master. The Jedi also had to deal with their own schisms in this time, most notably the Third Great Schism of 4250 BBY, which culminated in the Voltar Cataclysm, in which the Dark Jedi of that schism inadvertently killed themselves. For a time, it seemed that the Great Hyperspace War would be the only conflict of its kind, but 1,000 years later, it became apparent that the Sith were still out there. It began with the emergence of Freedon Nad, a Sith Lord and fallen Jedi who set himself up as a tyrant on Onderon. Nad was defeated by the Jedi, but his legacy endured on Onderon, and eventually it gave rise to other Sith cults. From the Nardists came the Krath, who took over the Empress Teta system, and eventually the Sith Lords themselves returned. In 3997 BBY, Jedi Knights Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma fell to the dark side and became the new Dark Lords of the Sith. They forced an eclectic alliance of Sith followers and set out to wreak havoc across the Republic. The resultant Great Sith War was very brief, but it was absolutely devastating for the galaxy. Countless Republic worlds were ravaged by the Krath, the Mandalorians, the Massassi, and the other servants of the Sith before Qel-Droma was captured and Kun was destroyed. And the Jedi Order suffered even worse damage. Unlike the previous generation of Sith, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma were not invaders from outside the Republic, but traitors from within the Jedi Order, and their promises of a new golden age of Sith resonated with many of the younger Jedi. A lot of these Jedi had been recruited at an older age, had families, or had other factors that made them susceptible to the dark side, and Exar Kun exploited this to turn hundreds, if not thousands of Jedi to his side. Some of them joined him outright, becoming members of the Brotherhood of the Sith and joining the war against the Republic. Others lay in wait, biding their time until one day, when Exar Kun gave the word, they rose up and butchered their masters. This event was known as the Jedi Pogrom, and it was devastating for the Jedi Order. The Jedi splintered into factions as apprentices turned against their masters, Darksiders battled those still loyal to the light, and the resultant chaos spread all across the galaxy. Many of the Jedi Order's wisest and most powerful Jedi Masters were caught at unawares and slain, and many promising apprentices were lost, either to the dark side or to the blades of Kun's followers. But the worst was still yet to come. Toward the end of the Great Sith War, Exar Kun ordered the use of an ancient Sith superweapon that tore out the core of one of the stars that made up the Kron Cluster, an open cluster of 10 stars in close alignment. The star went supernova, and its destruction set off a massive chain reaction, causing the entire Kron Cluster to destroy itself. The Kron Cluster itself was largely uninhabited, but it lay very close to the Ossus system, close enough that the supernova threatened to cleanse Ossus of life. With very little time, the Jedi Order had no choice but to evacuate their ancient homeworld. As they did so, the Sith arrived. While the Mandalorian Crusaders attacked the evacuation ships and caused chaos in the skies, Kun, Qel-Droma, and a small team of Massassi landed on the planet to loot it of the many artifacts that the Jedi kept there. Qel-Droma was captured, but Exar Kun and his Massassi escaped with a horde of stolen artifacts, which they took to Yavin 4. Many other artifacts, as well as countless texts stored in the Great Jedi Library, were unable to be evacuated, and the Jedi were forced to leave them behind. Most of the Jedi were able to evacuate Ossus before the blast from the supernova reached the planet, but others were left behind, as were the majority of artifacts and texts the Jedi had stored on the planet. Many of these were destroyed, while the remainder were buried in the ruins of the Jedi libraries and vaults. There, they remained for millennia, as the Kron supernova formed the Kron Drift, a debris field and remnant nebula that rendered hyperspace travel to Ossus all but impossible. The Jedi and the Republic won the Great Sith War in the end, but the Jedi Order had been devastated by the conflict. In the end, the Jedi had lost thousands of Padawans, Knights, and Masters, including most of the oldest and wisest Masters in the Order. The Jedi had lost their homeworld, and with Ossus, they not only lost numerous temples, academies, and other facilities, but an enormous amount of lore, teachings, and artifacts. The Sith had wiped out 20,000 years of Jedi history, and the Jedi would spend the bulk of the next few decades struggling to rebuild and re-examining the doctrines of their order to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. There were a few decades of peace after the end of the Great Sith War, and the Jedi spent them licking their wounds and rebuilding from the destruction of Ossus. Everything that had been salvaged from Ossus was moved to nearby Exus Station, where, in the next decade, several Jedi conclaves were held to determine what the future of the Jedi Order would look like. One of these conclaves appointed war hero and prodigy Nomi Sunrider Grand Master of the Order, and under her direction, the Jedi regrouped and eventually relocated. After some debate, the Jedi Enclave on Coruscant, formerly a small peripheral academy, was chosen for expansion into a new, much larger Jedi Temple, which would become the new home of the Jedi Councils and what remained of the Jedi Archives, as well as the Order's new primary training center. Other satellite temples and academies remained in operation, most notably the Dantooine Jedi Enclave and the Jedi Temple on Ilum, and new ones were even established in this period, such as the Taris Jedi Tower. But the Order's leadership relocated to Coruscant, where the new Jedi Temple rapidly took shape, becoming a defining feature of the planet's skyline. While the Order was easily able to relocate to a new headquarters, it had a much harder time rebuilding its knowledge base. Many teachings were lost forever with Ossus, as were many artifacts, and while most that remained were brought to the new Jedi Archives on Coruscant, which was quickly filled with replacement texts for those lost with Ossus, the Order's archivists were determined to not let such catastrophic losses happen again. Many texts were duplicated and spread to the archives of other Jedi academies, such as the Dantooine Enclave, while important artifacts were spread out across the Jedi Order's academy network. Many were taken to a secret redoubt the Order established in one of Telos 4's polar irrigation stations, which was converted into a place the Jedi could retreat to, taking all their lore with them should catastrophe strike again. It wasn't just the location of the Jedi Order's headquarters that changed in this period either. Jedi doctrine was adjusted as well. Many members of the new Jedi High Council, most prominently Vrook Lamar and Atris, argued that the lax policies and decentralized structure of the Jedi Order had been major contributing factors in the fall of so many Jedi to the dark side. In the 40 years after the end of the Great Sith War, the Jedi Order thus became a more centralized institution, and several of its doctrines changed. Many of the Jedi who followed Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, as well as the two Lords of the Sith themselves, had joined the Order at an older age, had been part of a group of Padawans trained by a single master, and had been trained on more remote outposts of the Order. Many also had close attachments with other people. Atris, in particular, frequently pointed out that Qel-Droma had fallen due to attachment, and that the first Great Schism had been started by two lovers. As a result, the Jedi Order instituted new rules that forbade masters from training more than one Padawan at a time and restricted the recruitment of older Force sensitives. Going forward, the Jedi would almost exclusively recruit children who were raised apart from their families at a Jedi Academy, and if those initiates achieved the rank of Padawan, their master would train them and only them. These rules weren't as strict as they would later become, though later revisions to these rules lowered the age at which Jedi could be recruited. During the Sith Wars, older children and sometimes young teenagers were allowed to be taken in for training. While masters were forbidden from taking multiple apprentices at a time, Padawans weren't as firmly bonded to their masters, and many Padawans sought extensive training from masters apart from the one they were assigned to. Jedi of Padawan rank were generally still much more independent, allowed to seek instruction from whatever master they wished and travel the galaxy independently. Apart from the official rules the High Council instituted in this period, there were also several unspoken norms that were established. Jedi were discouraged from contacting their birth families going forward, though it wasn't forbidden, and romantic relationships also started to be strongly discouraged around this time. This last measure was initially controversial, however, and though romantic attachment became taboo and was even considered to be forbidden by some, it would be many years before it became officially forbidden. Additionally, the Jedi Order slowly began to centralize during this period. Due to the casualties the Order had suffered, the Jedi Watchmen ceased to exist after the Great Sith War, and though they were later reformed, the practice of Jedi setting off on their own, settling on random worlds and training whatever Force adepts they found there, largely ended. Going forward, almost all Jedi would be trained at the Jedi Academies, where their training could be standardized and apprentices could be watched more closely for signs of the dark side. As a consequence of this, within a generation, most of the Jedi in the galaxy lived at the Jedi Temple or one of the satellite enclaves rather than being spread across the galaxy. This led to an increase in the authority of the Jedi Councils, especially the High Council, which started to take a more direct role in micromanaging the Order, though the councils of the satellite academies still had a fair bit of authority. Many of the smaller Jedi outposts had been lost or abandoned during or after the Great Sith War. However, it would still be some time before most of the Order lived at the Coruscant Jedi Temple. The Coruscant Temple may have been the Order's headquarters, and many Jedi relocated there after the destruction of Ossus, but many satellite facilities retained their prominence. The academies on Dorin and Teia persisted as major satellite academies, while new facilities were founded on Taris, Telos, and Alpharides. The Jedi Temple on Ilum became much more important since, with the destruction of Ossus, it was now the Jedi Order's main source of Adagen crystals. Perhaps the most important satellite academy in this era was the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, a small, remote facility that nonetheless trained large numbers of Jedi and was managed by several members of the Jedi High Council. The Dantooine Enclave was remote and secret, all but unknown to non-Jedi, so it effectively became the secondary headquarters of the Jedi Order, a hidden stronghold the Jedi could rely on in times of crisis. Indeed, the Dantooine Enclave ultimately became the de facto headquarters of the Jedi Order during the turmoil that was to come. Just a few decades after the defeat of Exar Kun, the Republic found itself embroiled in yet another conflict of enormous scale, the Mandalorian Wars. After Exar Kun's defeat, the Mandalorians had reformed themselves, grew stronger, and had begun to conquer sectors beyond the Republic's borders. The Republic, unwilling to get involved in another war so soon, did nothing. But before long, the Mandalorians turned their attention to Republic space, and the Republic military was woefully unprepared to deal with their invasion. The early stages of the Mandalorian Wars saw the Mandalorians win battle after battle, rampaging across Republic space and becoming stronger with each planet conquered. The Republic, with no one else to turn to, begged the Jedi for aid, but the Jedi Council refused to get involved. The Order had yet to fully recover from the catastrophic losses it suffered in the war with Exar Kun, and the Jedi also had their own issues to deal with at this time, as it was busy dealing with the Jedi Covenant, a rogue, radical sect within the Order that made a play for control of the Order under the cover of the Mandalorian threat. But on top of that, many on the Council sensed that the Mandalorian Wars weren't what they appeared to be. They felt that some darker force was behind the Mandalorian invasion, and the Council ultimately decided that it needed to study the threat in greater detail to ascertain what had driven the Mandalorians to invade before it went to war. The decision was made with the understanding that the Jedi would join the war eventually, but some Jedi were unwilling to wait. Many of the younger Jedi were outraged at the Council's inaction. Led by two talented knights named Revan and Malak, they argued that innocents were dying by the millions out on the Rim, and that they as Jedi would go out to save them whether the Council approved or not. The Jedi Council warned them against joining the fight, fearing that the brutality of the war would draw some of the younger Jedi over to the dark side. But these Jedi Crusaders refused to listen. At Revan's command, they broke with the Order, enlisted in the Republic military, and took the fight to the Mandalorians. The Senate gratefully accepted their support and appointed these Revanchists to the rank of general, with Revan and Malak appointed the Republic military's supreme commanders. The Mandalorian Wars marked the first time that Jedi were directly integrated into the Republic's military hierarchy. In previous wars, the Jedi had been deputized into Republic service as a mercy corps. They fought for the Republic, but they did so on their own as a sort of separate unit. But in the Mandalorian Wars, the Revanchists took direct command of Republic forces, becoming the first Jedi generals. The first, but not the last. They led Republic forces to victory in the Mandalorian Wars, beating the Mandalorians back out of Republic space and then pursuing them into the Outer Rim, where Revan and his followers utterly destroyed the Mandalorian fleet at Malachor V. In the process, however, the Revanchists were changed by the war, just as the Jedi Council had feared would happen. Revan and his followers found that victory sometimes required them to make moral shortcuts, sacrificing some lives to save others, and slowly, this mentality fueled by the trauma of war, led them down the path of the dark side. The Mandalorian Wars ended in 3960 BBY, but the Republic had only a few months of peace before the next war began. This time, the invaders weren't Mandalorians, but a new Sith Empire, one founded and led by Revan and Malak, who proclaimed themselves the new Dark Lords of the Sith. Many in the Republic chose to join them. In the Republic military especially, large portions of both the army and navy were more loyal to the heroes of the Mandalorian Wars than to the Senate, and these soldiers defected to join the Sith. All of the Jedi who went to war with Revan had fallen to the dark side, save only Mitra Surik, who had lost her connection to the Force at Malachor 5. Surik had actually returned to Coruscant to face trial, following which she was exiled from the Jedi Order. Her place in the ranks of Revan's army was quickly filled, as many other Jedi defected over the course of Revan's war, having become disillusioned to the Council's inaction in the Mandalorian Wars, swelling the numbers of Revan's Dark Jedi followers. This time, the Jedi Council took action immediately, going to war on behalf of the Republic against this new Sith threat. The Jedi Civil War had begun. In the Jedi Civil War, the Jedi went back to operating as a mercy corps instead of generals, but due to the greatly weakened state of the Republic military and the defection of many of its top officers to the Sith, the Jedi still essentially commanded Republic forces in the war, with the Jedi Council working directly with the Republic military's top commanders to oversee the conflict. The Jedi and the Republic were at a constant disadvantage throughout the war, as the Sith Empire had a seemingly limitless fleet at their disposal, and Revan's tactical genius was unmatched. But the Republic held together thanks to a young Jedi named Bastila Shan, a master of battle meditation. In the end, Revan was captured and had his mind wiped by the Jedi Council, who programmed him with a Republic-loyal identity in the hope that he would help them stop Darth Malak, the new ruler of the Sith Empire. Revan did exactly that, and against all odds, the Republic emerged victorious from the Jedi Civil War. But the cost was devastating. The Republic lay in ruins, and the Jedi Order had suffered tremendously. It had never truly recovered from the Great Sith War, but the fall of the Revanchists, the defection of many of the younger Jedi, and the casualties suffered during the Jedi Civil War further diminished the Order's numbers. Revan converted or killed as many Jedi as possible during the war, dispatching hunter-killer droids, Sith assassins, and non-Force sensitive Sith commandos to eliminate as many Jedi as possible. And by the war's end, barely over 100 Jedi remained. Many of the galaxy's academies and outposts were destroyed or abandoned over the course of the war as well, killing many Jedi Masters and destroying even more Jedi lore and artifacts. The Jedi Enclave on Dantooine effectively became the Jedi Order's headquarters over the course of the war, which caused more tragedy when the Dantooine Enclave was located and destroyed by the Sith near the close of the conflict. The Jedi Order had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, and the worst was still yet to come. In the initial period after the end of the Jedi Civil War, the few Jedi who remained slowly started to disappear. Sometimes, individual Jedi would turn up murdered. At other times, many of them would be lost at once. As the casualties increased, what remained of the Jedi High Council called for a conclave on Katar, a Mirror-Luke colony, where the remaining Jedi would meet and attempt to discern the threat that was stalking them. In a sense, they succeeded. Their presence drew Darth Nihilus, one of the Sith who was hunting them, and Nihilus destroyed all life on Katar, wiping out most of what remained of the Jedi Order. Those few Jedi that hadn't gone to Katar were all that remained, and after this disaster, they went into hiding, switching off their lightsabers and scattering. The Jedi Order, as far as the galaxy knew, had disbanded. It was around this time, in 3951 BBY, that Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, returned to known space. The Sith, believing her to be the last of the Jedi, immediately set out to kill her, and in response, Surik set out on a quest to locate the Lost Jedi, the survivors of the Order who had gone into hiding. On Telos 4, she had a chance encounter with Master Atris, one of the Council, and from Atris's archives, she discovered that several other Jedi Masters were alive, scattered across the galaxy. She set out to find them and bring them to the ruins of the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, believing that the Jedi needed to come out of hiding for the Sith to be stopped. Along the way, Surik slowly regained her connection to the Force, and as she gathered allies on her adventures, she began to train them in the Jedi ways. By the time all the surviving Jedi Masters had been found, the Exile had trained 6 students: the deserter, Aton Rand, former engineer Baldur, the bounty hunter Mara, the ex-Sith Visas Ma, an Ichani handmaiden named Brianna, and a Jedi washout known as the Disciple. In the end, Surik returned to Dantooine, where 3 Jedi Masters, all former members of the Jedi Council, had gathered. The Exile implored them to take action against the Sith, claiming that they had revealed themselves and the galaxy would fall if they didn't act quickly. But as they had a decade prior, the Council insisted on waiting. The Masters argued that the true threat still hadn't revealed itself and that the best course of action was to remain in hiding. They even refused to recant Surik's sentence of exile and attempted to once again cut her off from the Force. This drew the ire of Darth Traya, who killed the 3 Masters before they could carry out their sentence. Traya herself was defeated by Surik and her allies soon thereafter, as were the other Sith and Atris, who had fallen to the dark side. But by that point, all the surviving Jedi Masters were dead. But this was not the end of the Jedi Order. The true Lost Jedi, the apprentices that Mitra Surik had gathered and trained, set out and found other Jedi in hiding, and together they rebuilt the Order. Many of them would go on to sit on the re-established High Council and train apprentices of their own, as the Exile had trained them. With the Sith threat vanquished, at least for a time, the Jedi Order could finally recover, and it would recover under the guidance of Jedi who were less dogmatic, less conflict-averse, and overall less orthodox than those that had come before them. Above all, they were Jedi who vowed that the Order would never abandon those who needed their help again. The end of the Dark Wars was not the end of the Jedi Order's struggles. In fact, just 300 years after the rebuilding of the Order began, a new round of wars with the Sith began. By this point, the Jedi Order had rebuilt enough to play a major role in defending the Republic against the galaxy's latest Sith Empire, but once again, it suffered serious casualties in the war, and the Jedi Temple was all but destroyed in the sacking of Coruscant, forcing the Jedi to relocate to Tython. Nonetheless, the Jedi rebounded again, and the Order's situation during the Galactic Wars was never as dire as it had been in the aftermath of the Jedi Civil War. In the centuries following the final defeat of the Sith Empire and the end of the old Sith Wars, the Jedi Order was finally able to rebuild and recover from the damage it had suffered. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was rebuilt, and its archives were returned to their former glory. The ranks of the Jedi Order recovered, and the Jedi were once again able to return to their role as the guardians of peace and justice in the Republic. But as the Order began to thrive once more, it did so in a different form. All the destruction the Jedi had suffered changed them as an order, both in terms of doctrine and in terms of structure. The old Sith Wars saw the vast majority of Jedi academies and enclaves in the galaxy destroyed from Ossus to Dantooine, and while satellite academies continued to exist after the wars, the vast majority of Jedi began to relocate to the temple on Coruscant. The centralization of the Order continued, and though the Order of Jedi Watchmen was resurrected and some Jedi continued to act more independently from the Order, Watchmen were now more beholden to the councils, and Knights Errant became increasingly rare. Jedi doctrine changed in this time as well. Despite the unorthodox training and views of the Exile's students, who had refounded the Order, the Jedi High Council ultimately maintained its rules forbidding Jedi from training more than one Padawan at a time, and the Order continued to exclusively recruit children. The discouragement of romantic attachments slowly became a rule of the Order as well. But the most important doctrinal changes were the Order's relationship to the Republic and how the Jedi viewed their role as peacekeepers. The students of the Exile had seen the consequences of the Jedi Council's inaction in the Mandalorian Wars and Dark Wars, and they were determined to never let that happen again. Going forward, the Jedi Order would be much more proactive in going to war when they believed it was necessary to protect innocents or to preserve the Republic. As we mentioned earlier, so many wars between the Republic and the Sith had slowly convinced the Jedi that the servants of the dark side wanted to topple the Republic, and so any enemies of the Republic came under immediate suspicion as proxies of the Sith, just like the Mandalorians had been in the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi Order became increasingly defensive of the Republic, and as a result, it became much less critical of the Republic's abuses and much more institutionally linked to it. Partly, this was in reaction to the Sith's hatred of the Republic, but it was partly due to an increasingly common view among the Jedi that, while the Republic wasn't perfect, it was necessary for galactic civilization, and there was no better alternative for it. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, many of Mace Windu's students quote him to students of their own. "Jedi do not fight for peace. That is only a slogan, and is as misleading as slogans always are. Jedi fight for civilization, because only civilization creates peace." For Mace Windu, for all his life, for all the lives of 1,000 years of Jedi before him, true civilization has had only one true name: the Republic. When Windu's talking about civilization here, he's referring to a very specific kind: a cooperative, pluralistic, democratic society built on peaceful collaboration instead of violent conquest. And the Republic was indeed the only major power in the history of the Star Wars galaxy to come close to that deal. It wasn't perfect, but it was a hell of a lot closer to true civilization than the Sith Empire. But after years of contrast between the Republic and the Sith, the Jedi had started to lose sight of the ways in which the Republic fell short of that ideal, to the eventual detriment of the Order and the galaxy as a whole. And while the Jedi Order wasn't officially an arm of the Republic just yet at this stage of the timeline, it was still increasingly committed to the Republic's defense, and in the next chapter of galactic history, the Republic would need a whole lot of defending. 2000 BBY saw the start of the Jedi Order's fourth Great Schism, fought against the followers of a former Jedi Master named Phaneus, a solipsist who had left the Order after the Council had rejected his beliefs. Phaneus sought out the last remnants of the old Sith Order, which had been reduced to tiny, isolated cults on the fringe of the Outer Rim, from whom he learned the Sith ways. Phaneus declared himself Darth Ruin and amassed an army of followers, led by defectors from within the Jedi Order. These followers became the new Sith, and they made war on the Jedi and the Republic. Darth Ruin was slain not long after he declared himself, killed by a group of his own students, but another Dark Lord rose to take his place, and the new Sith Wars would continue off and on for the next 1,000 years. Once again, the Jedi Order was called upon to defend the Republic. The new Sith Wars were unlike the old Sith Wars, as the new Sith were not an empire, but an exceptionally schismatic and disorganized network of Sith cults and petty states. They were spread across the galaxy, all waging their own small wars against the Republic, the Jedi, and each other. Few of the new Sith sects were all that strong on their own, but they rapidly multiplied so that each sect the Jedi destroyed was soon replaced. Thus, the new Sith subjected the Republic to a death by 1,000 cuts, slowly wearing it down until it began to collapse under its own weight. The Jedi did the best they could to slow the Republic's decline, even taking up roles as generals in the Republic military, but they could only do so much. After the Battle of Mizra in 1466 BBY, the Republic all but ceased to exist outside of the Greater Core, and most of the galaxy fell into chaos. It was up to the Jedi Order to stop the bleeding. As the Republic began to fall apart, the Jedi Council took increasingly direct control of it. For a few hundred years, the position of Supreme Chancellor was consistently held by Jedi, often the Jedi Grandmaster, and the Jedi took direct control of the Republic military. By essentially micromanaging the Republic, the Jedi Council just barely kept it from dissolving altogether, but the Republic was still greatly reduced in scope. By 1100 BBY, the Republic barely existed, having withdrawn to a few small pockets of territory in the core and along the major hyperspace lanes. The HoloNet shut down beyond the borders of Republic space, leaving most of the galaxy sectors cut off from each other, beginning a century-long period known as the Dark Age of the Republic. Even as the borders of the Republic shrunk, however, the Jedi continued to fight to protect the people of the sectors it had abandoned. Many Jedi Knights followed the example of the old Jedi Watchmen, striking out into the Rim and taking charge of remote sectors that desperately needed their help. Some of these Jedi were knights errant, roaming the Rim and fighting to protect the innocent from whatever pirates and Sith they encountered, but many settled on planets in the Rim and became their permanent guardians. Like the Watchmen of old, they trained apprentices from among the Force sensitives of their planets, and many of them even had children who succeeded them as the Jedi protectors of their homeworld. Slowly, these new Watchmen became Jedi Lords, the rulers and guardians of the sectors they kept safe from the Sith, who gave them hereditary estates and titles in gratitude. The Jedi Lords raised armies to defend their territories and became the leaders of small sects of Jedi, much as the Watchmen of old had been. Together with their students and their followers, these lords led the fight against the Sith, while the Council managed the Republic. The Council, for its part, really didn't like the Jedi Lords. Apart from the whole reinventing feudalism thing, which the Jedi Council was pretty justifiably cautious about, the Lords and their followers were fast and loose with Jedi doctrine, having families and running petty states out on the Rim. They didn't answer to the Council and did more or less as they pleased. The Lords, for their part, didn't like the Council either. They saw the Council as dogmatic and unwilling to do what needed to be done. Nonetheless, the two did manage to work together well enough most of the time, and together, they kept the new Sith from bringing about complete civilizational collapse. In the final decade of the New Sith Wars, the Jedi Lords pooled their forces under the banner of the Army of Light, governed by the new Jedi Grand Council. They fought a 10-year war with the Brotherhood of Darkness, which had, in turn, united all of the new Sith under its banner. The two armies clashed for the final time on the lonely planet Ruusan, where the Sith were believed destroyed at long last, albeit at great cost to the Army of Light. With the 7th Battle of Ruusan, the New Sith Wars ended and the Republic, against all odds, had survived, entirely thanks to the Jedi. The Republic rebuilt quickly after Ruusan, and as it did, it instituted a series of reforms known as the Ruusan Reformations. These reforms affected not only the Republic, but the Jedi as well. Per the Ruusan Reformations, the Army of Light was disbanded and the position of Jedi Lord was abolished. Sectors returned to ordinary government, and all Jedi were once more brought under the authority of the High Council. The High Council, in turn, was brought under the authority of the Senate. The New Sith Wars had made the alliance between the Republic and the Jedi closer than ever before, such that the two had effectively become one entity. The Ruusan Reformations formalized this, making the Jedi Order an official part of the judicial forces, subject to the orders of the Senate. After millennia of development, the Jedi Order finally took the form we know from the prequel trilogy. So that's our look at the Jedi Order's involvement in the Sith Wars. But what do you think? Would you like to see more videos on any of these topics in the future? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and join us for the next one.